I wasn't a perfect man. I know that. But I was a good one. I showed up. Every single day, I showed up. Not because someone was watching. Not because I expected anything in return. But because that's what you do when you love your family. You show up. Every morning I was up at 5:45. Before the alarm. I'd walk down that hallway in the dark, past all the drawings Erick had taped to the walls, superheroes with lopsided capes, rocket ships with smiley faces on the windows. And at the very end of the hall, right before the kitchen, there was one drawing that got me every single time. 3 stick figures holding hands. And underneath, in his big, careful letters, Daddy, Mommy, me. I'd stand there for just a second every morning and look at it. Then I'd go make coffee, pack Erick's lunch, and get ready for another day. That was my life. And I loved it. I loved every ordinary, unremarkable minute of it. Vanessa didn't see it that way. I remember the night she said it. We were having dinner, nothing special, just pasta and some leftover garlic bread, and she put down her fork and said, without even looking at me. "You're boring, Daniel. You come home, you cook, you play with Erick, you fall asleep. Every single day. You're like furniture." I sat there for a second. I actually thought she was joking. I even started to smile. She wasn't joking. I put my fork down slowly and said, "I thought that was called being a husband." She looked at me then, finally looked at me, and said, "I thought so too." I was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in the dark next to her and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what I had done wrong. What I had missed. What I needed to change. 3 weeks later, she was gone. She didn't leave quietly. I'll give her credit, she didn't try to sneak out. She packed a bag, she told me she was leaving, and she told me the name. Marcus Cole. I knew that name. She'd dated him before we met. She used to call him exciting. Unpredictable. I always thought those were red flags dressed up as compliments. Turns out I was right. But here's the part that broke me. Here's the part one can barely talk about even now. Erick was 7 years old. He was standing in the doorway of the living room in his pajamas. The ones with the little rockets on them, holding a half-eaten piece of toast. He'd heard the suitcase. Kids hear everything. He looked at his mother and said, "Mommy, where are you going?" She stopped. She knelt down. She kissed him on the forehead. "Mommy needs some time, baby." Time for what? She didn't answer him. She stood up, she picked up her bag, and she walked out the front door. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. I watched all of it. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? And then Erick turned around and looked at me with those big eyes of his, and he said, "God, I can hear his voice right now," he said. Daddy, did we do something wrong? I crossed that room so fast. I got down on my knees and I pulled him into my arms and I held him as tight as I could without hurting him, and I said, "No, buddy. We didn't do anything wrong. We're going to be okay." I said it like a promise. I was terrified it was a lie. After she left, I won't pretend it was easy. It was the hardest stretch of my life. There were nights I'd put Erick to bed, close his door, walk to the bathroom, turn on the faucet so he couldn't hear, and just fall apart. Just stand there against the sink and let it out. Then I'd splash water on my face, dry off, and go back to being Dad. Because he needed Dad. He needed me. So I showed up. Every single morning, I showed up. I learned to braid his hair when he went through that phase. I learned which TV shows he loved and which ones bored him after 2 episodes. I sat through every school play, every soccer game, every terrible movie he wanted to watch on Saturday mornings. I learned that he liked his sandwiches cut in triangles, not rectangles, because triangles taste better. Dad, don't ask me to explain it. I learned my son. And he was the most remarkable person I'd ever known in my life. At night, after he was asleep, I'd sit on the back porch and call Grandpa Raymond. My grandfather was 84 years old, living alone in his farmhouse 40 miles out of town, and he had a voice that could calm a storm. Deep and slow and steady. Every time I heard it I felt like maybe things were going to be alright. "You holding up, son?" he'd ask. "Trying to, Grandpa. Trying is enough." One night I called him and I just broke down on the phone. I couldn't hold it together. I told him she hadn't called Erick in 3 weeks. 3 weeks without calling your own child. There was a long pause. Then Raymond said, "Some people don't know what they have until it's been given to someone else. Or until it's gone altogether. That's her curse, Daniel. Don't let it become yours." I wrote that down. I still have it. My sister Linda was Linda. She showed up at my house the week after Vanessa left, sat down at my kitchen table, crossed her arms, and said, she walked out on a 7-year-old boy. I don't care what excuse she has. There is no excuse. I tried to say her name in that tone, Linda, like I was going to defend Vanessa somehow. Old habits. Linda looked at me and said, "I know you still love her. That's your business. But I want you to hear me clearly. If that woman ever walks back through that door, you need to remember this moment. This kitchen. This version of your life. The one she didn't want." I looked around my kitchen. Erick's drawings on the fridge. His sneakers by the back door. The puzzle we'd been working on together for 2 weeks. "I'll remember," I said. I meant it. 8 months after Vanessa left, Erick started getting tired. Not regular tired. Not, "I played too hard," tired. This was something else. A deep tiredness that lived behind his eyes and took the color out of his face. He started pushing food around his plate. He'd fall asleep in the car on the way home from school even if we only had 10 minutes to drive. I noticed immediately. I always noticed everything about Erick. One afternoon I sat across from him at dinner and watched him not eat, and I said, "You feeling okay, buddy?" He looked up at me and said, "Yeah. Just sleepy." "Erick. You slept 9 hours last night." He shrugged. And I tell you, something about that shrug, the smallness of it, the way his little shoulders moved, I felt something cold move through my chest. A fear I couldn't name yet. I took him to Dr. Okafor the next morning. She examined him carefully. She was thorough, she always was. And when she came back into the office and sat down across from me, she had an expression that I will never, not for the rest of my life, forget. "Daniel," she said. "We need to run more tests." 3 weeks later I sat in a small office and she told me. Leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Advanced. Aggressive. She kept talking, treatment options, clinical trials, survival rates, and I could hear her voice but the words weren't reaching me. They were bouncing off something. Because my mind had stopped at that one word and could not move past it. My son. My 9-year-old son who saved the last cookie for me every time. Who told me triangles tasted better than rectangles. Who had a drawing on the wall that said Daddy, Mommy, me. I finally looked at Dr. Okafor and I said, "Is he going to die?" She didn't look away. I respected her for that. She said, "We're going to fight very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's possible." Yes. It's possible. I nodded. Slowly. Like a man learning a fact he'd spend the rest of his life trying to unknow. I called Linda from the parking lot. I couldn't speak for the first 30 seconds. I just held the phone and breathed. Just breathed. "Daniel. Talk to me. What happened?" "It's Erick," I finally said. "He's sick, Linda. He's really sick." She made a sound I've never heard from her before or since. Then she said, "What kind of sick?" "Leukemia." Silence. Then, "I'm on my way." "You don't have to. I'm on my way." That's all she said. I sat in that parking lot for another 15 minutes before I could drive. That night, I called Vanessa. I didn't want to. Every part of me said don't do it. But she was his mother. She deserved to know. So I called. Marcus answered. I closed my eyes. I need to speak to Vanessa. She came on the line sounding annoyed before I'd even started. That was her default setting for me by that point. What is it, Daniel? Erick's sick, I said. He has leukemia. I thought you should know. The line went quiet. Then her voice changed, the annoyance fell away and something raw came through. How bad? Bad enough that you should probably come see him. I'll come. This weekend. She paused. Daniel, is he scared? I thought about that morning. Erick had asked me, do superheroes ever get sick, Dad? And I'd said, some of them do. And they always find a way to fight back. He'd nodded very seriously, like I'd confirmed something important. I said to Vanessa, he's being braver than either of us deserve. I hung up. She came that weekend. She sat beside his bed and cried, and Erick held her hand and told her not to, told her he was a superhero. She came back the week after. And the week after that. No Marcus. Just her, showing up, trying. I gave her credit for that. It didn't change what had happened. But I gave her credit. Grandpa Raymond came too, whenever he could. 40 miles each way, every time. He'd sit by Erick's bed and tell him stories about the farm, about catfish the size of dogs, about lightning storms that turned the sky purple. Erick would close his eyes and listen and his face would go peaceful. One afternoon I walked in and heard them talking. Erick asked Raymond, Grandpa, are you going to die someday? I stopped outside the door. I don't think they knew I was there. Raymond said, without hesitating, everybody does, son. That's the deal we make when we get here. Are you scared? Not much. I had a good life. I worked hard. I loved people who mattered. You can't ask for more than that. He paused. The only thing that would make me sad is leaving before I got to see what kind of man you're going to be. And Erick said, I hear this in my sleep sometimes, Erick said. A superhero kind, Grandpa. Raymond laughed. That big, rolling laugh of his. I stood in that hallway with my back against the wall and my hand over my mouth so neither of them could hear me. Erick died on a Tuesday morning in October. Just before sunrise. That dark, in-between hour when the world hasn't decided yet what kind of day it's going to be. I was holding his hand. Linda was on the other side of the bed. We'd been there all night. There was no dramatic moment. No last words. Just a breath, and then no more breath. I sat completely still. I don't know for how long. I held his hand and it was still warm and I couldn't let go. I just could not let go. Linda was crying softly. I couldn't cry. I was somewhere past crying, somewhere I'd never been before and never want to go again. Eventually I raised his hand to my lips. I kissed it once. And I said the last thing I knew he would have wanted to hear. Superhero kind, I whispered. Grandpa Raymond died 11 days after Erick. The doctor said it was his heart. Linda said it was grief. I think they were both right. I think he held on long enough to make sure I was still standing, and then he let go. We buried him on a gray Thursday. Pastor Jerome spoke. He said something that landed in me like a stone in still water. Raymond Hayes planted seeds his whole life. He didn't always see them bloom. But here we are, blooming. I've thought about those words every day since. 3 days after the funeral, a lawyer named Arthur Penfield called me. He had a careful, respectful voice, the kind you use when you're about to hand someone something heavy. Grandpa Raymond had been careful with money his whole life. Decades of quiet investing. The farmhouse, the land, decades of savings and stocks. The total came to just over $25 million. I sat in that office and heard that number and felt absolutely nothing. My grandfather was gone. My son was gone. $25 million was just a number in a room. I didn't tell many people. I told Linda. That was it. But somehow, I don't know exactly how, the word got out. It reached Vanessa 6 days after the will was read. I knew the moment it happened. Because my phone started ringing. I watched her name light up on my screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Vanessa. Daniel. Her voice was warm. Asterisk warm. Asterisk like we were old friends who hadn't spoken in too long. I've been thinking about you so much. I've been so worried. How are you holding up, honey? Honey. I hadn't heard that word from her in years. I'm fine, I said. You shouldn't be alone right now. I know we've had our problems, but with everything, Erick, and now Raymond, you need someone, Daniel. You need support. You need. Where's Marcus? I asked. A little pause. Just a half second, but I heard it. That's been over for a while. I didn't say anything. Daniel, I made a terrible mistake. I know that. I know I hurt you, I know I hurt Erick, and I have to live with that every day. But I never stopped loving you. I never stopped loving us. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked across the room at the drawing on my nightstand, the superhero with the lopsided cape. The last drawing Erick ever finished. I thought about my little boy standing in the doorway in his rocket pajamas with a half-eaten piece of toast. Asterisk mommy, where are you going? I thought about 2 years of school pickups alone. Lunch boxes. Sick nights. Erick asking me, why doesn't mommy call, Dad, and me not having an answer that was good enough. I thought about Grandpa Raymond saying, some people don't know what they have until it's gone altogether. And I said to her, calmly, because I was done with anger, I said. Vanessa. What changed? Everything changed. Erick. He died 2 weeks ago, I said. You were there. You held his hand. You went home. I let that sit for a second. What changed in the last week specifically? Silence. I heard about Raymond. About the inheritance. She was trying to find the right footing. But that has nothing to do with. Don't, I said. Quietly. Please don't do that. Daniel. I'm going to ask you one question. And I need you to think carefully before you answer. I looked at Erick's drawing. If I had nothing, if Raymond had left me nothing, and I was still just the man on Maple Creek Drive with the ordinary job and the ordinary life, would you be calling me right now? The silence that followed was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. She couldn't answer. She searched for something, anything else. Finally she said. I miss you, Daniel. That's not what I asked. Another silence. I care about you, she said softly. Vanessa. I took a breath. Our son is gone. He spent 2 years of his short life without his mother in his daily life. He went through something that would have broken any grown adult, and he did most of it without you. And 11 days after we put him in the ground, you're calling me. My voice cracked, just once, just for a second. I can't. I can't do this. Daniel, please. Take care of yourself, I said. And I hung up. I sat in that quiet house for a long time. The drawings on the walls. His sneakers still by the back door. I hadn't moved them. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the room got dark and I hadn't turned on any lights. Linda showed up the next morning. She always knew. She brought coffee. She sat at the table. She looked at me and said, didn't even say hello, just said, she called you. Yeah. And? I said goodbye. She studied me for a long moment. Then, how do you feel? I thought about it honestly. I didn't want to perform anything for my sister. She always saw through it anyway. Like I finally closed a door I should have closed a long time ago, I said. And like I'm the loneliest I've ever been in my entire life. I looked at her. Both at the same time. Linda nodded slowly. That's what honesty feels like sometimes. We sat there in the quiet for a while. Then I said, I want to do something good with the money, Linda. The inheritance. Something real. Something that matters. She looked at me, and she smiled, the real one, the one she didn't give out often. Now that, she said, sounds like Raymond. I started a foundation. I named it after Erick. The Erick Hayes Foundation. It funds pediatric cancer research. It supports single parents with critically ill children. Because I know what it is to be that person, sitting in that hospital alone at 2 a.m. wondering how you're going to keep going. I know what that is. It was the first time since I lost him that I felt something that wasn't only pain. I go to Raymond's farmhouse sometimes. I sit on the old porch and look out at the fields. Even in winter, when everything is bare and brown, I sit out there. Raymond used to say bare fields are just fields that are resting. I think about that a lot. I think about what Pastor Jerome said at the funeral. Raymond Hayes planted seeds his whole life. He didn't always see them bloom. But here we are, blooming. I think about Erick telling Raymond he was going to be a superhero kind of man. I'm trying to be that too. I won't pretend I don't have hard nights. I do. There are nights I walk down that hallway and look at those drawings and I don't know how I'm still on my feet. There are mornings I reach for my phone to call Raymond and then I remember, and the grief is as fresh as the first day. But I'm still here. I'm still showing up. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Vanessa is out there somewhere living her life. I genuinely hope she finds some peace. Not for her sake, really, for Erick's. Because Erick loved his mother. He loved her even when she made it hard. And I'd like to think that wherever he is, he wants her to be okay. That's the kind of boy he was.